So welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another one of these little knockout tourney videos that I've been doing on and off over the course of the past few months. I decided that now would be a good time to do them, seeing as I have worked my way through all of the backlog that I know still exists based on the fact that I'm laid up off work for the time being, considering that I am currently infected. And yeah, so I figured that now would be a good time to do it, especially seeing as I'm running out of time really to go through all of the unit categories before the next patch comes out. And this is maybe going to be one of the more interesting ones because this is the shock infantry, where slamming two units together and seeing which one can kill the other in the shortest space of time is possibly most relevant for shock infantry, even more so than it was for the lance cavalry, based on the fact that lance cavalry you're supposed to be charging in and out over and over, whereas shock infantry, it's a little bit more difficult to do with shock infantry. Generally speaking, you want to leave them in melee so that they don't take a bunch of damage when you turn them around. So this may be a fairer test for this class of unit than it has been for a fair few others. Now, based on the seedings I have chosen, again, it's based entirely upon my gut feeling more than anything else, although I do have the benefit of hindsight with the shielded infantry having already been done. I could pick what tended to be more important in that category and transfer it across over here. So naturally the Pharazim Swordmasters I thought were the ones most likely to win, because much like the Meteor Guard of last time, they're the only one of these units that has a third hit point. They're also armed with a sword, which means they're going to be dealing more base damage, which seemed to be more important actually in comparison to the armor piercing. There are several armor piercing units worth watching out for in this category as well, though, including stuff like the Gwythi Myrdain and the Sons of Durin, Elven and Dwarven offerings both. So it's going to be interesting, this one, to see where the dice fall. So the very first battle has often been a bit of a foregone conclusion in these, the first ranked unit facing off against the 16th, and this is no different really, because it's the 3 hit point unit against the only non-multiple HP unit that is here. And once again, it's poor Lothlorien that seem to be bringing up the rear, and I think this is because, with the exception of their pikemen, all of their really exceptional units are hybrid units, so they can't really be brought into consideration here, which is a bit of a shame for them, because honestly something like the Watchers of the Golden Wood would give a better accounting of themselves in melee. But as it is, it makes the test far too messy to run. So the Pharazim Swordmasters, of course, easily able to overcome the Lorraine Swordmasters. The number 1 ranked unit gets their traditional bye into the quarterfinals.
General lies slain upon the battlefield. defeat is a bitter drop to swallow. Next time it'll be our foe that sups from this most
The second battle, however, proving to be a far closer affair, as you would maybe expect, with the Gwaith Myrdain of Imladris facing off against the Sons of Durin from Erebor. Interesting to see these ranked 8 and 9. You would maybe expect Dwarven and Elven units to be a little higher, but like I said, they are a pair of units with a focus on armour piercing, and I didn't know, based on the shielded infantry, how effective or not effective that was going to be. However, I did kind of see this result coming, with the Gwaith Myrdain able to overcome their Dwarven counterparts, purely because they're both strong in the same aspects. However, the Dwarves are more reliant on their own armour than the Elves are, so that means that the Elven armour piercing is going to be that much more efficient. The engagement in the way that it fell as well was a little bit more favourable to the Elves, so the Gwaith Myrdain will be moving on to the quarterfinals.
Half our men. Dealt a stinging defeat today.
Back to a battle with a little bit of disparity involved in it. We have the Temple Executioners from Mordor taking on the Witch Realm Enslavers from Rhudaur. Rhudaur, well known for their armour piercing, and this high-end shock infantry unit is no different. However, the problem I always felt they were going to have is that Rhudaur do tend to skimp on their armour values a little bit, and especially against some of the heavy swordsman units that were included in this bracket, I felt like that was where they could come undone. Unfortunately for them, in round 1 they're going up against one of the very best heavy swordsmen the game has to offer in the Temple Executioners, and not too surprisingly the Temple Executioners were the ones to prove victorious in this battle. The Enslavers, always a little bit better when they got a little bit of support around them, and obviously in 1v1 environments like this, the slightly more well-rounded nature of the Mordor swordsman here able to carry the day.
Our general lies slain upon the battlefield. Lost half of our men.
For the fourth battle in the sequence, we have the fan favourites, the Elven King's Palace Guard, going up against the Witch Realm Hammer Guard from Angmar. I wasn't actually sure how the Elven King's Palace Guard were going to perform in this kind of environment, to be honest, given the fact that they are jacks of all trades, but maybe the infantry killing power of several of the other shock infantry units that were on display was something to be considered. In this situation, however, it does appear that the armour piercing and the elven skill all mixed together really did do the business against the Witch Realm Hammer Guard, because the Palace Guard passed this test with flying colours, and they will be moving on to the quarterfinals where they will face sterner tests. Now this may be the ranked 2nd unit against the ranked 15th, but this was maybe a potential upset in the making, with the Noldorin Blade Masters from Linden taking on the Champions of Neferat from Harad. In very much the same way as the Enslavers, I put the Champions of Neferat down this low because I was worried about their defensive abilities, given the fact they don't have a great deal of armour. They're very much focused around their attack, their armour-piercing attack at that. And it did prove to be the case that the Noldorin Blade Masters were able to overcome them, those blades able to do a lot of damage through the more limited defensive faculties of the champions. But it was far closer than I thought, and actually this is one battle where it could potentially, based on little tweaks to the engagement, go the other way. So maybe the Champions of Neferat were ranked a little bit low, considering how well they did and considering how much closer this battle was than some of the others we've seen already. But even so, Linden were the worthy victors here, and they will be moving on to the next round.
Only half our force remains. Our general lies slain upon the battlefield. Tidings. The enemy general lies dead. Victory is ours. Let it be a salve upon our wounds.
The sixth battle in the round of 16 between the Morroquendi Glademasters and the Nazkai. This also represents the first battle where the seedings were not followed, because the Nazkai, ranked 10th, overcame the Morroquendi, which I was a little bit surprised at, actually. The Morroquendi I've always considered to be kind of similar to the Palace Guard. The Palace Guard, with how well they did against the Witch Realm Hammer Guard, I was kind of expecting a repeat of that situation here. But it turned out not to be the case, and instead the Nazkai were able to batter the Morroquendi into submission. So it does go to show maybe a few more differences exist between the Palace Guard and the Morroquendi than I was given credit for. But yeah, the Nazkai, they are still a very, very strong unit, one of the better units of armor-piercing shock infantry the game has to offer, in my opinion, and they definitely prove their worth here, able to punch above what I perceive to be their weight class to move through into the next round.
Half their men. The battle is very much in our favor. Victory will be ours.
Moving on, Dol Amroth and their Haven Guard taking on the Tharbad Warhammers of Cardlan. Heavy swordsmen like this are one area in which you expect Dol Amroth to excel at. This wasn't the most surprising of outcomes either, given the fact the Haven Guard were able to overcome the Tharbad Warhammers on this occasion. So yeah, I mean, Dol Amroth, you would expect this result though, is the thing. And the Haven Guard I do rate higher than just about any other unit on this list, given they are ranked 3rd, of course, behind only the Pharazim Swordmasters and the Noldoran Blademasters, at least in my opinion, before this little tourney was run. So yeah, they passed their first test. We'll see how far they're able to get.
Only half the enemy force remains. Our foolish general has thrown his life away. Perhaps our chances of victory with it. We've been dealt a stinging defeat today.
And last, but by no means least, we have the Harbingers of Castamere of Umbar taking on the Dalian Paladins. Now, this was the only other in round 1 that did not follow the seeding pattern, because the Harbingers of Castamere knocked out by the Dalian Paladins, which does surprise me a little bit. Some people may ask why I've got the Harbingers of Castamere ranked up at 6, and that's because I was favouring swordsmen based on what I saw in the shielded infantry videos, and for the most part that did pay out. I mean, the only non-highly ranked unit that didn't make it through were the Harbingers of Castamere, so that is worth bearing in mind. But the Dalian Paladins can only assume that the really thick armour they wear is able to mitigate the damage dealing potential that the swords on the Harbingers of Castamere were potentially going to be able to deal out, but still, very, very impressive performance nonetheless from the Dalian Paladins, and they will get a chance at moving further into the competition while the Harbingers are eliminated.
Only half the enemy force remains. My lord, only half of our force remains. General lies dead. We have sent the Corps to hell. This is a clear victory that goes to only men of great virtue and valor.
So there we have it, round 1 complete. For the most part, the seedings were followed with 2 notable exceptions, and those 2 exceptions bringing forward some armour piercing into the next round, as have the Gwaithir Myrdain and the Elven King's Palace Guard. So all 4 of the top ranked units are through. All 4 are the best units of swordsmen the game has to offer. They would be my picks for making it through to the semi-final. We'll see, however, if that is actually what happens as these battles get underway. So to start with, a little bit of a surprise in some ways, not in terms of the result, because the Pharazim Swordmasters against the Gwaithir Myrdain, the 3rd hit point of the Pharazim Swordmasters in the end was enough to see them over the line, but this was the longest single engagement of any that happened in this tournament, I can say, having now run all of the battles. And the Pharazim Swordmasters were only just able to see themselves over the line, so the damage dealing potential and also this surprisingly high melee defense for an armor piercing unit that the Gwaithir Myrdain possess, able to give the Pharazim Swordmasters a run for their money. Not able to knock them out, however, so the Pharazim will be moving on and will still maintain their position as favourites moving in to the later stages of the tourney. But yeah, the Gwaithir Myrdain definitely proving themselves to be a strong contender here.
Only half the enemy force, only half our force remains. Pray something changes in the course of battle, for defeat seems almost certain. Our army is tiring. Something changes in the course of battle, for defeat seems almost certain. Something changes in the course of battle, for defeat. Our foolish general has thrown. Our enemies have snatched victory from us like thieves in the night. We will not be so lucky next time.
So rank 4 against rank 5, in theory this should have been the closest battle that there was, and between the Temple Executioners and the Elven King's Palace Guard. And I'm sure that many people will be happy to see the Palace Guard were the ones that actually managed to overcome the Temple Executioners here. So a very, very impressive performance from them. Again, I don't know how big of a role the armour piercing combined with the Elven skill is playing in these battles, but even so, the Temple Executioners were the unit that I expected to win through in this engagement, but they were not. So yeah, the jack of all trades, the Elven King's Palace Guard still going strong. They will have a very stern test in the next round against the Pharazim Swordmasters, but if they can overcome that, well, we'll have to wait and see, won't we? But yes, the Elven King's Palace Guard doing well. It is also worth saying that the armour upgrades perhaps have been playing into the hands of the Mirkwood unit, but that can't really be entirely true here because the Mordor unit also has access to such a thing, so it's maybe not quite the advantage that it would otherwise be, but yes, a good performance from the Palace Guard as they move into the semi-finals.
Our general lies slain upon the battlefield. Good tidings. The enemy general lies dead.
And this battle is also where the Nazcai's run comes to an end. They were able to upset the odds against the Morroquendi Glade Masters, but not so against the Linden Forces and the Noldorin Blade Masters, as they managed to ease past the finest that Isengard have to offer and get themselves into the semi-finals. So the ranked second unit still going strong. Not too surprising, this one though, as much as the Nazcai can take advantage of units which maybe have some slightly strange stat spreads like the Morroquendi do have. The Noldorin Blade Masters are much more straightforward in the sense they do a lot of base damage, they've got a lot of melee defense. They do have a lot of armour as well for a unit like this, so that was one area in which the Nazcai could maybe have been efficient, but ultimately the Nazcai themselves were just taking too much damage at the hands of the Noldorin, and the Linden units are the ones that move forwards.
Only half our force remains. Protect these lands.
The last battle in this sequence, however, is probably the site of the most surprising outcome yet between the Haven Guard of Dol Amroth and the Dalian Paladins of Dale, because the Dalian Paladins were the ones to be victorious in this one, which did surprise me quite a lot, and I can only assume that a big part of this is the fact that the Dalian Paladins have got such thick armour, and the only units they faced so far, at the very least, are ones that do not have armour piercing, so maybe this has just been an example of the bracket being somewhat kind to the Paladins. Maybe against a fellow armour piercing unit they would have struggled a little bit more, but you can't argue with the way that the battles have gone so far. They have managed to overcome, maybe the Harbingers is a little bit more, not too surprising, but I was very surprised they were able to overcome the Haven Guard like this, and it wasn't even as if it was by a couple of units. The Dalian Paladins were able to win through in a more noticeable fashion than that. So yeah, there we have it. The Dalian Paladins move forward to the semi-finals than the last four, and the Haven Guard must make way.
My lord, only half of our force remains.
So some surprises there, as we see from the brackets. The Pharazim Swordmasters and the Palace Guard will face each other in the first battle upcoming, and then the Blade Masters and the Paladins after that will be the second battle. It is that last battle, the Dalian Paladins, which does take me most by surprise. We'll see if their luck can hold further into the tourney. But first and foremost, let's get on with the business of the tournament favourites facing off against the fan favourites. So, the Pharazim Swordmasters against the Elven King's Palace Guard. The Pharazim Swordmasters' third hit point represents a very scary foe indeed, but the Palace Guard have been adept at very efficiently carving their way through what are very tough units up until this point. This is their greatest challenge to date, however, and yet they are able to overcome it. It is going to be the Elven King's Palace Guard that move forward into the final. The Pharazim Swordmasters getting knocked out, and based on the last tourney, I was really expecting the Pharazim Swordmasters to not have too much trouble in navigating this tournament based on how dominant the Mithril Guard were in the Shielded tournament. However, not only did they struggle a little bit against the Gwaith Myrdain, but they have ultimately been knocked out by a fellow Elven unit, the ones from Mirkwood. They will be moving forward into the final. The Pharazim Swordmasters will have to content themselves with a tilt at the third place playoff. But yeah, surprising. A little bit surprising, yeah, but I suppose if it was going to be a unit that overcame them, it would be an Elven one.
Pray something changes in the course of battle, for defeat seems almost certain. Only half the enemy force remains. Defeat seems almost certain. We've lost half of our men. Men have fought long and are becoming tired. Good tidings. The enemy general lies dead. For the moment, the fortune of battle goes our way. Let's pray it remains as such. Utterly vanquished. Let all who remember this day.
And speaking of Elven units marching on, we have the Noldorin Blade Masters against the Dalian Paladins, and this is finally where the Dalian Paladins' brave run in this tournament comes to an end. In a not dissimilar way to the Goblin King's Bodyguard last time, there comes a point when the ever-increasing level of quality that the underdogs are having to face off against eventually spells trouble for them. And the Noldorin Blade Master's stats are simply too high. Again, the armour piercing the Dalian Paladins have may well be coming into good effect against the Noldorin Blade Master's armour, but those base stats that the elves have are it's very, very high. And it goes to show as well that the melee defense, or the bigger stock they place in melee defense than Alduin Blade Masters, comes into its own in comparison to the more armor-focused approach that the Haven Guard and the Harbingers have. So there we have it, the Dalian Paladins ultimately falling by the wayside.
Lord be merciful, we have lost half of our men. Fire to flame, our general lies slain upon the battlefield. Lord preserve us. We have been dealt a stinging defeat today.
Now for the third place playoff between the Pharazim Swordmasters and the Dalian Paladins. Maybe not the sort of battle where we expected to see the Dalian Paladins, honestly, but here they are. Once again, though, this is a situation where that third hit point is just going to be too much for the Dalian Paladins. They did very, very well just getting into the semi-finals itself and having a contest with... Ultimately, they have faced off against the units which I figured would have come in first, second and third, defeating the one I thought would finish third. But not so lucky against the last two opponents. And the Pharazim Swordmasters, while they may very well be slightly disappointed to only be going home with the bronze medal on this occasion rather than the gold I expected them to, the Dalian Paladins ultimately not able to stop them from getting onto the podium. So there it is, the Dalian Paladins probably the best underdog in this tournament as a whole, but ultimately the Pharazim Swordmasters able to prevent them from getting onto the podium.
Only half of our force remains.
And now there is the small matter of having to deal with the first and second placed units. We have the Noldorin Blade Masters and the Elven King's Palace Guard facing off against one another. Which one is going to come out on top? Well, I feel like most people would want the Palace Guard to come out on top, but unfortunately, as much as they have managed to punch above their weight in a couple of battles so far, this is where their luck runs out. It is going to be the Noldorin Blade Masters that ultimately win the day. And I would wonder why this is. Again, I can only assume that the armour piercing is playing a more active role in deciding these battles in this tournament than it was in the shielded infantry, which I would have expected it to be the other way around, honestly. As much as the numbers are certainly higher in terms of the offensive stats here, I would have thought that armour piercing would have made a bigger difference in cracking through the more hardy defences of shielded infantry. However, it's here where it seems to be at its most important, because the Palace Guard's armour piercing certainly is one thing that would have seen it through against the Pharazim Swordmasters, but the higher melee defense of the Noldorin Blade Masters, especially in the last two battles, well, last three battles actually, against the Nazkai, Dalian Paladins, and now their fellow Elven units in the Elven King's Palace Guard, proving to be extremely, extremely important. And yeah, the Linden unit able to take it home, but it is an Elven 1-2 with the Numenorians in third.
Remains. Only half our force remains. Slain the enemy general. Without him, his troops will lose their will to fight. This is a clear victory.
And here we have the end of tournament splash screen. The Noldorin Blade Masters in first, the Palace Guard in second, and the Pharazim Sword Masters in third. Not the expected results, although the first two units are at least on the podium somewhere. The Palace Guard are the ones sneaking in there, again punching what I would have considered to be above their weight, but this is an interesting kind of tournament where if I mixed up and randomised the seeds, we would probably get a completely different result, because armour piercing is very clearly playing a very integral role to how some of these matchups are going, hence the fact that Dalian Paladins ultimately finishing in fourth, which was certainly not something I was expecting to see. But it makes it interesting, and yeah, the fine balance between a lot of these shock infantry units is there for all to see. And yeah, so I don't know when the next one of these is going to be happening, because it may very well be before I get the chance to do something like Sword Cavalry. It is probably going to be time for the next version of the game to release, in which case, you know, all of this would need to be scrapped and started again. But first and foremost then it will of course be faction overviews, with the likes of the Rovanian and Ered Luin and the like able to be talked about in detail. I might even have to do all of the faction overviews again, which would be quite the interesting thing. A bit of a return to roots perhaps, but yeah, other than that, my voice is starting to give out. I am still, after all, laid up at home with the infection, so I should probably bring about a swifter end to this than I'm currently doing, but I will be doing another battle replay in the upcoming days. I think there's a replay that I'm going to be doing on Longbottom, which will be in Reforged in the current version of the game as well. But considering the fact that I am now recording a little over a month ahead of time, there's a lot that could happen between now and then in terms of replays that I get and versions of the test build that they want me to show. all of these sorts of things could come into play. So I'm not really sure, can't really give too much in the way of detail with regards to what's coming up. But there will be more Reforged, there will be more Silmarillion here and there, and by the time this replay comes out, we will be getting closer and closer to the end of the year, where there is going to be a decent amount of upheaval by the looks of things. We'll wait and see though. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.